The photo. Next one. The photo. That's it. What is it a photo of? Clouds and grass. Reflected in water. Yeah, Margaret at first thought it was upside down. That's very tempting to think like that. What? Then you see the ripples. Yes, there's a bit of a giveaway in the ripples. It all depends on what you think you're seeing, doesn't it, of what that picture means to you. And I think that's true of life, and particularly about the friendship. Who actually, that'll be right, David, I think will. Who's found that when you tell your friends something of a word of advice, that they always listen to you? They don't always take it. No. It's interesting. How good are you at taking advice? It might vary and depend on how vulnerable you're feeling at any particular time. But there are times where a lot of us might feel, I'm confident that I know what the right answer is about something. And the picture sort of reminds us that you can have different views. I want to show you the actual other photo that I took at the same time. The next one, thanks Jenny. That's a photo a little bit further back. You can see that the grass is actually a reflection in the water as well, and the clouds. And just on the edge of the water, where the water is not as deep in this body of water, it reflects better than the grey water that's a bit further out. If we stand back and look at the big picture, that's what Jesus is saying to us in this reading. It's not about us being super intelligent and knowing what to do in all times, but recognising that God speaks to us as a friend. Jesus speaks to us as a friend to show us and reveal things to us. Jesus' words in this section, in Di's sermon last week, we heard about how Jesus invited people to abide in remain in me, in the vine, and be connected to the vine, and that whole imagery of bearing fruit because of being part of the vine. Whereas in the reading today, as Barbara read, it's abide in my love, which we may find comforting to think about God's love for us. But is abiding in God's love really only mean in God's love for us? Is there something bigger in the meaning of what love is in this? Because Jesus says, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. And then he says, as I have kept the Father's commandments. Father, Son. In that relationship with the Spirit in the Trinity, that's the example that Jesus is giving of what it means to keep the Father's commandments. So it's not just something about being a servant and being at the beck and call of someone. It's something much more intimate and being involved in the love that's there between the Father, Son and Holy Spirit, to be involved in that community of love and allow our community here to be a community of love. But it's a love that's not just talked about as thinking about a warm, fuzzy feeling. It's a love that Jesus spoke of where one would lay down their life for the sake of one's friends, which is what Jesus did for us. Jesus also talked about We often think that we are in control every now and again. And we talk about us choosing God. But Jesus is saying that God chose us, that God invited us to recognise God around us and to be part of that relationship. So what are we going to do as a result of being invited into friendship? One of the things is, how do we respond to those around our neighbours? How do we recognise where God's at work around us? I've been reading a lot about that in the past few months, and I found some very interesting ways and tools to actually help connect with neighbours and to think about that and to think about what is God doing in our world today and how do we recognise that. And I wanted to offer an invitation this morning. I'd like to share some of the things that I've been reading with anyone who was interested. So if you're interested in hearing some of the things that I've been reading and Di's been reading, I invite you to actually let me know so that we might actually either email you or have a conversation about some of the things that we've been learning. And one of them is about a prayer walk. And the prayer walk is 13 steps of how to do a prayer walk in your neighbourhood. 2 or 4 people get together and do a prayer walk. If that's something that interests you, let me know. Because I reckon it'd be interesting, because I was thinking before, just recently, someone who will be nameless, when we were doing the singing on Zoom, only had my microphone going to Zoom for a little time. I listened back to that and I thought, there's something missing. It sounds very different, and sometimes it wasn't even the right note. But as we're singing this morning, I thought, as we sing together, who was it? Charles Wesley used to say that even if you sing like a magpie, wouldn't have been a magpie, but even if you can't hit the note properly, community singing actually is something where together we can actually sound okay. And I think that's living in love and going out and exploring things together and praying about that is an important way of actually God speaking to us and us exploring together. So if you're interested in doing that, being involved in something like that, let me know so that we might be able to explore doing some of that together. And I want to leave you with a question as we do that. The passage from Acts follows on from Peter's experience of in the reading before today's reading of the vision of the food that's being let down and that God's at work even in those people that are not part of the Jewish faith. And it actually led to the point in the reading today where Peter could recognise that these people had the Holy Spirit. They had this connection, this friendship with God, and that why shouldn't they be baptised even though they weren't part of the community? And that's the question for us. Where is God at work in people's lives in our neighbourhood that aren't part of our congregation? And what's God calling us to recognise in those people? And how are we to respond if we're going to abide in the love of God and if we're going to continue the work that Jesus called us to do? A question to ponder over.